Leading people well is tough, even in the best of times. But what do we do when it gets really, really tough? How do we as leaders respond to adversity in a healthy and productive way? How can we continue to succeed in business and in life through the storms of leading well? You know, when dangerous storms begin to brew over the horizon, most herd animals and even humans have a tendency to take cover or move away from the storm, but not the buffalo. The buffalo, instead of running for cover, will gather its herd, take a few last bites of whatever food is out there, and head directly through the storm. As leaders, we have to do the same thing. We're all faced with different storms that come with leading well. Modern day leaders face leadership storms that can cripple an individual, a team, or an entire organization. Our guests are resilient leaders, some of the best resilient leaders our country has to offer. They'll walk us through how they actually got through these storms and how they became better on the other side. So join us on the Through the Storm podcast. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on the Through the Storm podcast. Today, I've been waiting for this day since I watched all of this guy's material online, the videos, the play he's done. He's done so much in his life. We have Scott Mann here. He is an amazing human being. He's written a couple amazing books, but I'm gonna give a brief intro to Scott, and then I'm gonna turn it over to him to fill in the gaps on what I've left out. So, Lieutenant Colonel retired Scott Mann is a former U.S. Army Green Beret, but as a Marine, I won't hold that against him too heavily. With tours all over the world, including Colombia, Peru, and multiple tours in Afghanistan, he and I chewed some of the same dirt at the same time, 2010. He's a warrior storyteller and the founder of Rooftop Leadership, where he shares the rapport-building and storytelling skills he's learned in Special Forces to help today's leaders make better human connections in high-stakes, low-trust environments. Scott's the author of the instant New York Times bestseller, Operation Pineapple Express, a third-person narrative detailing the harrowing stories of the veterans, volunteers, and Afghan allies who navigated the U.S. abandonment of Afghanistan in August of 2021. The Gary Sinise Foundation partnered up with Scott to bring his play, Last Out, and the Elegy of a Green Beret, which is amazing. You got to check that out, to stages across the country in an effort to provide healing to our veterans and families of the fallen, as well as providing insights to our citizens on the personal cost of the longest war in our nation's history. And I will say personally, when my wife watched that, when her and I sat down and watched that, it brought her to tears. It brought me to tears, one, and then it brought her to tears. Just like some of the things that you talk about, Scott, about this really brings to the forefront of things that happened in Afghanistan to people who we as people who were there during some of those times. We can explain it to the best of our mental ability, but when you see it on the screen, Scott, man, that was so well done. So welcome to the show. Just give a brief, just give a 30 seconds. What did we not say? What else do you want the listeners to know?
No, that's it, man. I've tried to I'm just Rex and Anita Mann's son. You know, I just try to not screw up and make them as proud as I can. And that's really it. That's how I was brought up, and a storyteller, you know, at my core. And my favorite thing is telling the stories of guys like you and so many other buddies that I served with, and illuminating what they did in this world and what they continue to do. I just think storytelling is such an amazing tool that we have at our disposal. And thanks for saying that about the play. It does move a lot of people to tears, and even folks who didn't serve or know nothing about the military. In fact, I wrote it really for them. It's always special when warfighters and their families locate themselves in the story, but it's also special to me when a civilian comes up to me, wrecked, and just says, I had no idea. I had no idea. And that means the world to me, because now I've breached them open enough that they're ready to have a real conversation beyond thank you for your service.
And man, what it does is it gives them tangible, like it's one thing to hear, like I said, one thing to hear the stories, it's another thing to see it. I mean, the opening scene is enough to bring people it just takes people aback. And it's so if you are out there and it's, you've got to see this thing, Google it, look at it, search it on YouTube. And your TED talk that when you go through it on your TED talk, it's just amazing. So it's life-changing. It's life-changing for sure. I didn't start acting until I was 50. You talk about a midlife crisis. You could have bought a Ferrari or something, but you went and started a play.
But I really just felt it scared the hell out of me, this notion of storytelling. I'd seen a couple of people who were non-veterans perform one-person shows and they were so emotionally available to the story. And I thought, and it just wrecked me. I mean, like in a good way. I just thought, God, what I would give to be able to tell a story with that much generosity. And so I looked at Monty after one of those shows, and I said, because we were already working on the play, I said, I think I want to be in the play. She's like, you have got to be kidding me. But she was my biggest fan, and it worked great, man. But there, I guess the takeaway on that is that with storytelling, and not just from the stage, any storytelling, it is as much a physical act of generosity told in the service of the listener with the full body intention as it is the spoken word, more probably. And that's what makes it so hard, because we're taught to button up and stay, tight, and no one wants to let go of that when they tell a story. And it's necessary, honestly.
And it's so difficult too. Like in chapter 8 of your new book, Nobody's Coming to Save You, you talk about that process. You talk about the generosity of your story and your scars and things that is truly the physicality of it is really, and like with the play, with the animation of it. And when you really dig into it and you hit the brain of the listener and the audience with multiple directions, multiple ways of inserting information into their brain, it's like you get the full experience. And when you're able to be vulnerable enough to tell those stories in that kind of a way, I think it's world changing. It truly is. Like you and I are storyteller. I love storytelling, and it's world changing. It truly is.
It is, man. And I learned the craft from a former NFL football player, and I talk about him in my book, Bo. And I had no idea. I thought I was a good storyteller coming from Appalachia and being a Green Beret who had worked with tribes my whole life. I thought I was a good storyteller. I was okay, but I had no idea the level of physicality and how much your instrument, your body and your voice play a role in the storytelling. And this is 250,000 years old. Like, this is primal. This is, I'm talking about tribal storytelling, the kind that, where shaman danced around the fire wearing animal pelts and would put the audience in a trance. It was the physicality of the storytelling that made that happen. And it's funny because twice a year I run an event out at a dude ranch where I teach people how to tell stories that way. And it's so funny, the looks on their faces, the stuff that I have them do that has nothing to do with the spoken word, like these crazy animal drills and things like that. And it's because the body has got to show up in storytelling. Like, you have to include, even if you're sitting, even if you're behind a podium, that's what people actually connect to, is when your body is aligned with the story. And we carry so much tension and we brace so much that if you don't know how to open that sucker up, you look like you don't trust yourself. And I think that's the biggest problem in the country today. People look like they don't trust themselves when they're trying to communicate.
Absolutely. And man, when you talk about losing audiences, when we're even just like when we're doing a podcast, you have, it's sometimes people can't see you. But like when we talk about losing an audience in today's day and age, the digital age where scrolling is, I think it's from 10 years ago, we have lost the ability to keep control of an audience's attention, even more so than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, because people are constantly, so it's just like that use of the physical body when you're telling story. It truly it gains people's attention, and it just really grabs hold of them. And I love the way you talk about that.
It is, man. And you're spot on. And that, in fact, if you think about it, if you're watching, let's say you're watching a performance of any kind, you notice the physicality of the body way before you notice the spoken word. Chris Voss in Never Split the Difference talks about a very famous study where basically when it comes to like people interacting and responding to human engagement, 60% is physicality, 30% is voice tonality, and only 10% is the spoken word. So like 90% of human connection in an engagement with another human is nonverbal. And so, but if you think about how we're wired to connect in the churn today, it's all PowerPoint and podiums, man. It's all hiding behind something in a represented space where you're not even and people just dismiss that right out of hand. The second that they see a bunch of slides, or they see that the first words out of your mouth from the stage are restrooms are to the left, thanks for coming, they're gone. They're already on their phones. And it's a shame, because a lot of people with important things to say are up there saying them and nobody's listening.
100%. So what I want to get into is I want to get into this. This podcast is about going through hard stuff. It's called Through the Storm because kind of the analogy is the analogy of the buffalo. The buffalo is the only herd animal that when a storm comes over the horizon, it'll grab up its herd and it will go straight through the storm because it knows that on the other side of that storm is a pasture, and it knows that that's the fastest way to get through the storm is going straight through it instead of going around it or away from it. Now, Scott, just from reading your book and just kind of following online, you're a man who has been through storms and a lot of them. And I would love if you could just unpack one of those and just tell us about the storm that you went through. And then tell us about how you got through that storm and how we can learn from you about how we can get through the storms of our lives.
Yeah, no, I love the metaphor. The brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. So the more we can provide metaphors to get through complexity, the easier the brain can make sense of it. So I think you picked an amazing metaphor for dealing with struggle. And, I'm reminded also of the, not just the buffalo analogy, but also, you as a Marine, probably fought in Helmand. You understand this better than anybody. Like a near ambush, like the only way to survive is to fight through it. You try to run, you try to flank, you're dead. The only way is through a near ambush. And very similar metaphorically, right, is that you just got to push through. And I do believe that. I subscribe to that belief, and I've had to live that myself. And look, I don't have the market cornered on struggle, but I have had my share of them. A lot of mental health. I'm an alcoholic, which I come from a long line of drunks. And that, I think that has had a bearing on my mental health and how I navigate the world from a very early age. But then my biggest challenge, I think, or my biggest storm probably, well, on a clip, I know it was coming out of the military. It was leaving the military and walking away from a career that defined me, in my opinion. It was what I'd wanted to do since I was 14, as I talk about Nobody's Coming to Save You. And I identified as a Green Beret. I identified as a Special Forces officer, as a guy who helped create village stability operations. And, everything I knew about myself, even in terms of how I was as a husband and a father, was inherently and tied and directly tied to my role as a Green Beret. And then all of a sudden it wasn't, just like that. It was just over. And I thought I was prepared for that. I thought I was ready for that. And in fact, thought I wanted that. But in reality, I was not prepared at all, in the sense that I had not prepared mentally and spiritually for what I was going to be going through. I had not prepared physically for what I was going to go through. I was terrified, if I'm being honest, about what life was going to be like on the other side. And I think I did Green Beret stuff all the way up until the time I left, because I couldn't bear the thought of not doing that. And, for me, it was a 1-2 punch. It was coming home to a country that was more divided, in my opinion, than Afghanistan was in many ways. And as Younger says in Tribe, that, it's one thing to be willing to die for your country. It's another to try to figure out how to live for it, because it's hard to know how to live for a country that's tearing itself apart along every imaginable line, from race to religion to politics, and that's what it looked like when I came home in 2013, was this just that, I'll talk about the churn that we faced in Afghanistan, which was just this horrific set of social conditions that you, by definition, were dropped into because that's where it needed to be fixed. But it was very tough. Well, that churn to me was worse at home, the way people were treating each other. And that caused me, because I think I had left my purpose and my identity in the team room and in my unit, it caused me to just really question everything that I had done my adult life, the time away from my kids, the buddies I'd lost, the buddies that, and frankly, teammates that were not around because of decisions I'd made, and all of that, just to question all of it, like, what was the point? And that was not good, because then I think a spiral just started that I couldn't even get my head around, where my marriage started to suffer. My relationship with my kids got really bad, even though they were still at home. And the thing was, Trav, the part that was was really giving me the worst time was I kept saying to myself, what is your problem, man? I mean, like you've been waiting for this your whole life. You've been married happily to this woman who now you have her, like you can do things with her. Your kids are still at home. Like you have a job. Like, what is your freaking problem? I mean, get it together. And the more I tried to get it together, the more I struggled and just, I felt like I was irrelevant. That I was in the way, I was a burden, and it just fed on itself. And I, at some point, started to believe it. And I never thought I would get to that place in my life, that I would feel that way, but I did. And I started entertaining the ideas of not being around anymore and what that would be like and how that actually would be better for people concerned in my life, and certainly better for me. And I think the worst part was feeling like I still had, I knew I still had something to offer. I still had something I wanted to say, but the thought of doing that was just too hard. So at some point the ideations started working their way into plans and just timing, honestly, I think about it now, and it's like I'm outside my body, just looking back at that time in my life, and everything moves in slow motion. And thank God I didn't pick up a drink. I think that would have probably been it, but I didn't. I managed to stay sober through all of that. I'd been sober for some time, but my wife and I had it out over finances one day. It had already gotten to a point where we weren't even on the same planet. She stormed out. I stormed back to the closet, went right. It was like, I didn't even, it was like, I didn't even think about it. It's like, fuck it. And I just went, and the next thing I know, I'm holding that 45 in my hand, and everything just slowed down. And, I could just remember literally like having an argument with myself, and over doing it, not doing it. And that's when my kid came home, and that shook me out of whatever the hell I was doing in there. And I just thought, all I could think of is, what kind of father does this and lets his kid find him? And what kind of father would I be if I did that? And that's all I could think. And so I just put the weapon up and, secured it and walked out like nothing had ever happened. And that was where I was for some time after that. It was a long time before I got some help. But the worst part was just that wasn't the end of it for me. Like, there were other times I went back in there. I don't think I ever got as close as I did that day. That scared the shit out of me. Even more so than the thing that happened to me when I got sober. And I knew there was a pathway for me. I just had no idea how. Every time I would try to get up in front of people or say something, I would just lock up in the civilian world. I could not communicate well. I had tons of anxiety and tension. And somehow, grace of God, found Bo, my story coach, and at a point in my life when I really needed that. And he showed me how to use that craft as a way to heal myself. And I'd still not told Monty. I had not told my boy. I told no one. The only guy I told, honestly, was a retired sergeant major from SF who I was dear friends with. And I told him that because he was getting ready to do it.
I get choked up, like, just listen to your story. I read this story, and you said it took 4 years to be able to tell your wife, to tell Monty about what happened right before you were going up to give a TED talk. Like, you changed your whole TED talk to talk about this story and with the way this impacted you. And I just want to say that, man, like, I experienced the same thing coming out of the Marine Corps. Was this crisis of identity of like, man, if I'm not going to Afghanistan, if I'm not going to Iraq, what am I? What am I doing? The Marine Corps, in my mind at the time, literally saved my life. I was an alcoholic. I'm like, same story. I've been sober for about 2.5 years now. But it just, like, I was an alcoholic. That was my coping mechanism. And it was just when I got out of the Marine Corps, it was the same story. It was like, I don't know who I am. And luckily I was able to jump right into the intelligence community, like literally 3 days later, more of the same. But I think that was just pushing down the inevitable of what of my healing and what I needed to do with my life. And to hear your story and have it resonate so deeply with me and mine, even down to the alcoholism, the attempt. Mine, your closet moment was a hot tub moment for me a year ago. And to be able to hear and see what you've done, when I look at the video, when I look at the play, when I read the book, when I look at your TED Talks, you've taken something that oftentimes, especially as military veterans, but even as as civilians, we can bottle up this thing and have no outlet for it whatsoever. And we don't, and whether that's story, whether that's conversation, whether whatever that is. So a lot of people aren't going to get on stages. They're not going to do the things that you and I do. But I think without that release of being able to get out what we have inside of us, the story that we have inside of us, that's filled with the scars that we'll talk about here in a minute, that are deeply ingrained in us. It takes one moment of just this indecision, this decision to take your own life is something that's extremely important. It's oftentimes it's not mixed with alcohol. It's just this decision that you made that's an out of body experience. You're like, okay, here I go. That's it. I've had 4 Marines in the last year take their own lives that we were in Afghanistan with in 2010. And that was 2010. That was 14 years ago. And I always look back and like, man, if they were able to have, if these guys were able to have some kind of outlet, to be able to figure out what that thing was that they could release into the world and be vulnerable enough to do it, maybe they would have made a different decision.
Man, you've hit on something so important, and I'm so sorry that you lost those buddies, man. It breaks my heart. I've lost a lot of friends too to suicide, and you've said something really, really important, and it is this thing that's inside of us that is bottled up, and we talk about that a lot. But for me, when I went to a mentor recommended I go and check out Bowie's in California, and I did that. This was 2015 or 16, hell, I don't remember. But I went there, and I remember watching. He was the last speaker to go, and the other ones were terrible. I was like, I'm not going to ever be a public speaker if that's what I have to do. But Bo came out, and he told some stories, and I mean, I was hooked immediately just because the dude was so dialed in. He looked like an operator up on the stage, like you could tell the guy had trained his ass off. Former NFL free safety, but the point was his craft was so dialed in, and he was so connected to the audience, and he wasn't up there for him. He was up there for me. That's what I felt like. And he told this one story of his all is lost moment. And it was radically different, right? Because he was in the NFL. He had blown his knee out for the 7th time, and they were carrying him off the field. And there's a photo of it, of him being carried off the field. And he pulls a photo up. He's like, that moment, it's like, I wasn't even upset that my knee was blown. He's like, I knew it was over. I'd gone a lot farther than I ever thought I would. I knew it was time to pay the piper. He said, but what I was thinking as they were carrying me off the field, I'd already moved past that. Wasn't I can't believe my career was over. It's I'm going to go to prison. I'm going to go to prison because all I know how to do is hit people so hard you smell smoke. Right? All I know how to do is actually hit people and hurt people. And if I don't find a way to turn this TNT inside my gut into something positive that I can put into the world, I'm going to go to prison. And that friggin' hit me like, I mean, I started weeping in the classroom, and I elbowed my way up to him afterwards. And I don't even remember what I said. I was just blabbering. And he's like, whoa, man, I got you. Like, I'm going to help you. And he worked with me for 2 years. This dude worked for me for 2 years. He worked with me and showed me how to take that TNT that was inside of me and develop a craft that allowed me to heal myself and then bridge the gaps with others. And that is exactly what you just said. It is there. This is the thing I want to communicate. I don't care what your profession is, what your industry, it doesn't matter if you're on the stage or not. There is an innate tool available to you that is storytelling that can be that thing that we wish those guys had. It is available to us, and it's available right now. It's in, because we are wired. We are story animals. The brain is a metaphorical pattern matching organ. It uses stories to make sense of the world, and the things that don't make sense in our life are the things that kill us. And so we have to use stories to make sense of things, and we can, but it's a skill, just like anything else in the Marine Corps, right? It is, you have instinct for it, but what we're talking about here is acquired skill. And that's where my heart will be till I die, is pouring myself into people for that acquired skill, because I've seen what happens when they get it. When that light comes on, there's no ceiling for them.
Oh, it's an amazing feeling. Like, and when you're on the other side of that table, you describe in the book about him just walking you through and having you mention some of the names of the men you lost, and just him holding that space for you to me, that was also so impactful, because like there's a lot of times when you I want to talk about the churn here after this, is like people get caught up in this churn, and they don't take time to hold people's stories and to listen and to sit down and actually have a good conversation, and like a vulnerable one where we are holding space for each other, where we're talking through things, where we're just blabbering and people are listening. So that was beautiful to me, the way you described that in the book, about just like that ability to hold the story.
Well, and we can all do that. He taught me that. And I think I say this in the book, is that for most of the engagements that we do that are high stakes in nature, it's not the stories we tell, it's the stories we ask to hear. Part of narrative competence, which is the ability to employ storytelling in real time to meet your goals, is it's a dance, right? It's a 250,000-year-old dance that, like, a lot of it is trying to see the pictures in the head of the other party by asking them thoughtful, open-ended questions that let them tell you a story, and if you do that, storytellers are the best listeners. Questions that's, like Chris Voss says, that start with what and how, and then just listen like your life depends on it. And because it does, and then if you do that, you're going to know exactly what story to tell in the service of their goals and pain, and that's the thing, like you said, no one's doing anymore. We're all just spewing one way, and if we're not spewing, then we're on our phones waiting our turn to spew. Even in conversations with our spouse, most of us are just thinking about what we're going to say next. We're not even listening.
Yeah. And like going back to the phone thing. So for those listeners out there, also in the book, Scott talks about his digital detox. Do a 72. I did when I sent you that message, said, hey, I'm going to do this digital detox. That was like I didn't pick up my phone. Like for 3 days, I was out on the beach. Like it was amazing. And like the clarity I've gotten, and not just clarity of my own mind, but to be able to walk through the airport and recognize people's faces and be like, hey, like, and just wish. And this is kind of something that I've picked up since then. It's just like when I walk through the airport and stuff, I look at people and I'm not on my phone, and you just see this, you can see people struggling in their faces, and you don't know their stories. You don't know if they're going to a funeral. You don't know if they're going to a party. You don't know what they're doing. And to just sit there and and recognize and look at people and wish them the best, pray for them, like whatever that looks like for you, is such a cool way to spend your time.
It is, man. It's an intention. It's an intention of how you navigate the world. Like, humans are mostly energy, and leadership is the management of energy, so yours and those around you. And it starts with managing your own energy, which means like setting your intention. And even before you walk into a meeting with your boss or a client, like 2/3 of that engagement is determined, won or lost, by how you prepare. What's the intention that you walk into that room with? Did you use diaphragmatic breathing to take yourself from a sympathetic to a parasympathetic state? Have you asked yourself what they value before you walk in the room and what they need from you? There's so much that just little moves that we can make in the world if we show up with these ideas. I want to see the pictures in the head of the other party, and that the relationship with that person is the asset, right? All the transactions flow from that. It's just a different way of navigating the world, but it really works. And it's actually, I think, what we're designed to do. It's not like it's foreign. It's just we've abandoned it, because of these devices and everything else in the churn. It's caused us to just bail on what we innately know to be real and true.
That is so good. And we've talked about the churn a couple of times. I want to unpack what the churn is for those who haven't read the book and for those who aren't familiar with the churn. In the book, you talk about the 4 Ds of the churn, the distract, disengage, disconnect, and distrust. Can you unpack that just a little bit for the listeners, just to tell?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, again, metaphor is important, right? And so I think that if you notice that it's harder nowadays to influence people, it's harder to reach a client, or it's harder to be heard in a crowded market, when you're trying to get your product out there, or even to hold the attention of your teenager or your employees in an all hands, it's harder. And we don't really have a language for it or a grammar for it. We just know something's off. And, the way I've always tried to communicate as a storyteller through complexity is using metaphor. And so the metaphor that I arrived at a long time ago, even before I got into this kind of storytelling, is the churn, as a way to describe a unique set of civil society circumstances that make it difficult to meet your goals with other humans. Now, I developed it for Green Berets and Marines and other advisors going into places like Afghanistan, where there was this churn. And the distraction was the coming and going of war fighters that would pull them off task, or, the disengagement was they didn't lack purpose because they'd been at war for 40 years, right? And the disconnection was a disconnection like from their own history, their own identity. And then the distrust, of course, was the ultimate manifestation of tribe against tribe, the Taliban, the Soviets. There was just so much conflict. The distrust was, they didn't trust each other. They didn't trust us. And I thought, okay, that's over there. But when I came home from the war, I realized, oh my God, we have evolved into our own level of churn here at home that's far more diabolical because it's accelerated by these things. So here at home, if you think about the 4 Ds, like distraction, the average attention span of a human is around 8 seconds. So when you get up in front of somebody, they're going to be off target if you don't hold their attention. And then you've got to work for every second after that. You have to, it's not an entitlement anymore, right? So people are horribly distracted. The disengagement, the average poll these days by Gallup, 85% of managers and employees are disengaged at work. And a lot of those numbers are pre-COVID. There's a huge absence of purpose in both individuals and organizations. And the problem with that is, like I talk about, nobody's coming to save you. At our core, we are meaning-seeking, meaning-assigning creatures. So if there's no meaning in that individual, then you have a major leadership problem on your hands, right? And so that's why disengagement's so bad, is it's complete absence of purpose. And leaders aren't clocking that. They just think that the kids these days don't get them. Like, no, man, or this bullshit term of, what is it? The recruiting problem in the military is because young people don't have a propensity to serve. Really? Is that true? That's not true. That's a leadership problem. They're not inspired to serve. And then the 3rd D is disconnection. And in our society, I cite that as we are disconnected from the natural world and ourselves. We're in a represented reality, right? And that represented reality is digital. And we live there. We live with our head down in this thing, in the screen. And so our connection to the outside world is not there. And that when we don't have a connection with the natural world, just from a Darwinian perspective, you're not long of this earth, And then finally is the distrust. And that one is the one I worry the most about, because it's like aquifers running under the ground. These sinkholes open up when a certain thing happens, whether it's a race thing or a political thing or just a fight with your in-laws. And all of a sudden it becomes like this just open chasm of, flailing bodies, and you can't pull it back. People are unfriending each other. I mean, when did that even become a verb? But And we've normalized it. Now you unfriend somebody because they don't agree with your political candidate who you've been friends with for years. So all of those things conspire to form the churn. And there's one other thing I'll offer that I didn't put as much in the book, and I'm going to go back and add this: resistance. This thing that Stephen Pressfield in the War of Art talks about, resistance. Actually, that was the artist's journey, but all of those, he has it in there. It's self-sabotage. It's the internal self-sabotage that we have that puts itself between us and our goals. When all of those D's hit us, we start to sabotage our own work. We start to feel like an imposter, like I did when my mental health plummeted. I thought, Nobody wants to hear my story. Nobody, I don't have anything to say. And all of a sudden you step back, and resistance, I think, is the worst part of the churn. It's the internal self-sabotage that we inflict upon ourselves because of all these external pressures. And we check out, we pull back, we decommit. And that is when we start to die, in my opinion.
Yeah, that seems like the culmination of the churn, is that resistance. Is once those things all kind of come together, it's just like this, okay, it's like giving up feeling. It's, for me, it's that hot tub moment. For me, it's just, it's that it can be those things where it's, man, that is so good. And when you talk about the churn throughout the book, it's so funny that well, it's not funny, but it's an interesting dynamic when we talk about, like when we're in Afghanistan, we're in Iraq, different places around the world, they have these micro churns, what it seems like to us. And where it's like, this is just the normal way of life. Then you come home and it's like, okay, I'm done now that I don't have to deal with that anymore. It just it's amplified, like you said, because of these. Right now I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screens I have around me right now at any given time. And it's just like, when you talk about that distraction piece and all those different things, I'm not looking at this, and I'm not, and to break it down a little bit more tangibly, I'm not having a conversation with my wife. I'm distracted. I disengaged. I'm disconnected. And it does create distrust. And me, my wife and I, we struggle. We have that conversation quite a bit. And it's because, like, man, we become distracted with all these different things that we don't sit down and have a conversation with the people that are close to us.
I think we have to keep having those conversations on this, Travis. And I think that for the rest of our lives, we will, because we are entangled with these devices. There's an entanglement that neuroscientists talk about that we don't even clock consciously. And so what's really dangerous and diabolical about this is that, as Adam Ghazali says in The Distracted Mind, we are ancient brains failing to make sense of a high-tech world. So our biology hasn't changed in a 250,000 years. So what those stuff that I drew below the waterline of the human operating system, of meaning and emotion and social connection and struggle and storytelling, those are our primal human operating system, kind of givens. Like, those are the things that are innate within us. The engineers of social media and 24/7 news, they know this. They know that we have primal tendencies. And that's why, like, when the Fox News alert goes off, my dad will literally drop his ice cream, like, to go see what that is. And, it's a conditioned response that is primal in nature. And so there's a real entanglement here, that if we don't have conversations like you and your wife have, and if you don't go to the beach and do a mandatory disentanglement, that's like a George W. Bush word, you're going to get so entangled, and AI is not even here yet. AI is not even here yet. And so we've got to exercise agency in our own life. That's why I wrote those chapters, and find how we disentangle on an ongoing basis. You're going to always have those screens because you're reaching and helping a lot of people. And as long as you can disentangle from it in a rhythm, that's cool. But it's when those screens become symbiotic with your existence, that's when we have a real problem.
Oh my goodness, that is so good, and it is so true too. It's just, and I work with a lot of engineers. Some of the most brilliant minds in the world are these software engineers that I work with, and they can sit there and work 18 hours a day on their computer and not pick their head up, and without somebody physically pulling them away from computers. And it creates a disconnected society. And I don't care what side of the political aisle you sit on, we've lost the ability to have cordial conversation. And it's because of the churn. It's because of the churn that we have back in the US. And if we can re-engage that, me as a former human intelligence guy, I miss having great human conversations, even with those I'm trying to get information from.
But here's the good news on that, Trav, is that there's not a finality in that. I firmly believe, and it's one of the reasons that I'm so adamant about doing crazy things like a play and not being a playwright, and not being an actor, and those kinds of things, is that I've seen it over and over again in just about every industry and arena, that we are not condemned to this reality of the churn. There actually is a way to not only navigate through it, but you can actually bring people out of that trance state. And you can create an environment of civil discourse. You can do a range of things that will return us to better days, and model what it looks like. And man, honestly, that's the main reason I wrote that book, is so that it could at least serve not as but a field guide on how to do that and to get back to that. And I think that's where we're going to continue to have these conversations for as long as we live, because if we're going to coexist with this accelerated technology and this digital domain with a primal brain, and it's the primal brain that actually gives us our social capital, we got to find a way to make both work.
100%. And it's the reason that I do what I do. I do a bunch of really stupid things, like races, like that I have no reason to. There's no reason I should be doing these things. I am amongst giants in some of these stupid things that I sign up for. But when you talk, so there was a half marathon up Pikes Peak, which is like a 14,400 foot thing. I don't finish first in any of these things. But doing these things, like when you talk about the primal brain, the more that's what that does. That activates the primal brain in the way that the primal brain was supposed to be activated. And if we can activate that more often by doing, you talk about it, gardening, going for a walk, doing whatever that looks like for you. That's how you activate the primal brain. And that is how you can still have a good, healthy relationship with technology, and still at the same, and still have a great impact on the world, as long as you are out there doing the things that help your primal brain activate a little bit more.
It doesn't even have to be epic or adventure or adrenaline. I call it getting out where the wild things are. Or, my dad just says, just getting back to nature. But it really is that. It is reconnecting with the natural world in the way that works for you. It's not the silver bullet, but try it. If you're finding yourself really jammed or inside your head, just go take a walk, because one thing that Ivan Tyrrell tells us is that movement and meaning are inextricably linked. And so if you can combine functional movement with a relationship with the natural world, it doesn't matter what it is. It will automatically become a micro reset for that engineer that's working 18 hours a day on software. You got to get outside and do something that reconnects you with the natural world, or you are on a very, very dangerous path. And it doesn't matter how tough you are, or I think our community has proven this coming back from the global war on terror. The body cannot handle that load. It is not designed to do it, and it cannot. And so we have to, but nobody's coming. Nobody's going to tell you that you need to do that. You have to exercise that agency on your own. And you're doing it. And I think a lot of people are starting to. I'm very excited. I'm very optimistic, honestly, about where we are right now. I think we're on the front end of an upswing that could be game changing in terms of reclaiming our civil society, our civil discourse, our connection with one another. I really do believe that. And I think, but it's going to be bottom up. I'm convinced of it.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. And in order to do that, it's going to be, like you said, bottom up. It's each one of us having small conversations with the people around us to be able to create a ripple effect that changes the way that we operate.
Well, and building platforms like what you've built, right? Through the Storm podcast. Now, the people that reaches and the lives that saves and changes, like there is a payload, right, to the digital domain in that represented world. And as long as we can manage the coexistence of both the represented realm and the natural world, and we understand the human operating system and what feeds it, then not only can we do what you're doing in that digital space, you can thrive. Like you can actually reach people and make genuine, authentic connections. But we have, I think, an inherent obligation to do both and to be grounded in our humanity. And not sacrifice that or trade that to become more like a machine. And that is my biggest fear. If anything takes us off the cliff, I think that's what it'll be, is surrendering our agency to, this attraction to machine mimicry. And I don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, man, I think we could talk for another 4 hours, which maybe we'll have to re-engage. But I want to hit on this last thing that you put in your book that had an amazing impact on me, and it was your definition of scar, of what a scar is. And when we talked about your storm and the scars that left, that what your military career had, what the scars you had from your military career and beyond that, and moving towards what you're doing now. So your definition of scar is an emotionally charged and often secret mark buried in the soul, earned through trauma and struggle that has the potential to form connective tissue with the outside world. The coolest definition of scar I've ever heard in my life. And it's just, it is so accurate. It's a kind of a culmination of what we've talked about so far, is being able to use those scars as a connector through your story, through whatever that looks like for you, to be able to give someone hope in the outside world, or to be able to motivate somebody to share their scar with the outside world. How did you come up with that definition?
Oh man, I think I can't claim it. I think it came from another place. It came from the thought of, a lot of buddies lost and a lot of mistakes made, and a lot of people who poured themselves into me, like Bo and others. And where it kind of came home for me was, Daniel Coyle is I'm a big fan of his, The Little Book of Talent, a really great book. But in that, Coyle talks about struggle as a biological necessity. It actually is something that happens to all of us. And Bo would always talk about generosity. Like when you're a performer, generosity is giving all of oneself. And then I read somewhere else that storytelling in its 70,000 year existence at a primal level, that what makes storytelling so compelling and why people remember it and why there's reciprocity from it is because stories are different than speeches. Speeches are for the speaker. Stories are told in the service of the listener. Right. So we've survived all these years, and we've accelerated our technology because we tell stories that when someone tells the story, think about it. For example, you said, when I was talking about that closet, it hit you hard. But what were you thinking about? The hot tub, right? So you literally transported, it's called narrative transportation. You were transported from your own lived experience into the safety of my narrative, where you can then process your own lived experience in the safety of that story, right? And that is the generosity of a scar. So not only does it represent storytelling, does it represent self-healing, but it represents a way to bridge the gaps that we have in our life and actually repurpose our struggles in the service of others, and that is the promise. That is what saves our life. That is what gives us life beyond the trauma.
That's just so good. And it's so, and the way, and the way that stories transport us into our own story, it doesn't even have to be the exact same story, or there's something in our story that can bring other people to their story. And like you said, it gives them the safety of it not being just theirs. It gives them the safety of it being someone else's.
Now this is where the training comes in. That's the very thing we don't want to do. Nobody wants to talk about their struggle. And if they do, they want to get through it really fast and get to 3 ways to be great like me, right? Or whatever. In other words, we want to get to the good stuff, but the good stuff actually is the struggle, not because we're going to wallow in it, but because that's what makes you most relatable to another human. It is a universal singular. We all struggle. And the first place somebody locates themselves in your story, which is what you want for that narrative transportation, is in struggle. That's when you go, oh man, she's like me. She's been scuffed up like I have. Maybe that's possible for my life. And they don't even know what your idea is yet, but they just know that they are connected to you and you're relatable. And now the walls come down. But to do that, you have to resolve your own trauma, or not your own. You have to work with someone to resolve the trauma. You have to recognize that the best scar stories in the world are the ones you don't want to tell others and the ones you don't want to tell yourself, and then you have to train on that story so that when you get up there and you tell it live or in the moment, you don't lock up from the trauma itself. You know what I mean? Like, you want to be able to, you get emotional. I do all the time. But that's different than seizing up, right? And so I just want to really emphasize that being generous with your scars is available to all of us, but it takes a little work. And it's something that once you start to get a feel for it, and the first time you see the look in somebody's eyes when they locate themselves in your story, you'll be hooked.
Oh my goodness. That is so good. It's so good. And it's so universal too, man. Scott, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for what you're doing, what you continue to do. It's impacted me more than you know, and it's impacted my wife more than you know. Just the way that it kind of, we've changed the way we operate. So I want to give you the last. I have two final things I want you to just go over. Hopefully we have enough time. It's one. I want you to just leave the listeners with one. If the listeners left with one thing, what would that be?
I would say probably the number one thing is you've got a story inside of you that somebody desperately needs to hear right now. And if you don't put that story to work in the service of other people, you're not hurting yourself. You're hurting the people that could benefit from the journey you've made and the miles you've run and the scars you've endured. Like, the whole point of your scars, in my opinion, is so that you can help somebody else make sense of their life and build on what you've done, and maybe not experience it to the level that you've had to. But if you internalize that and you just bury it, then you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting the people that could benefit from that. There's true generosity in a scar, but there's also a hunger for leaders who do that. And there's no limit to who that is. That would be my ask, is that to please think about the scars and miles that you've run and how you can make those available to others through the stories that you tell.
Yeah, man, for the listeners, take that and understand, like, your story matters more than you'll ever know. And I love that, Scott. Thank you so much. So last thing is, where can people find you? Where do you want people to look you up? How can people connect with you?
Man, we've got it. We've got all of my stuff on scottmann.com. It's easy to both for-profit and nonprofit. You talked about the play. It's on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, Google Plus. It's called Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret. It's actually going to be touring in 2025. And if you go to scottmann.com, you'll see there where it's going to be touring. I'm not in it anymore. I'm working on something new, and maybe we'll announce that on your show, Trav. And then the final thing I would just say is, if you want to do work on this kind of storytelling, and I hope you do, the book will help you, but also twice a year I run an event called Own Every Room Live, and it's out at a dude ranch in Old Florida. The next one is March 1st and 2nd, and then in September, and it's 2 days out in the woods and in an old theater and by a fire pit, learning what Bo taught me. And how to bring your story alive and how to integrate the physicality and own every room that you go into by being relatable and relevant. So that's also on my website. And then we're also going to be doing a book study on Nobody's Coming to Save You on remote. If you can't make it to the live event, we're going to be doing like a 6-week sprint on the book study starting early in the year, going chapter by chapter.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what the book does. It's one of my favorite things about that book, about Nobody's Coming to Save You. It's right here. Nobody's Coming to Save You. Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Shit Done. Is the vulnerability. Like, man, your vulnerability in that book is what makes you connect. It just connects us to you. And also, like I was telling you, when you get the audiobook and you hear your voice, it just connects you that much more. So I like to do both. But so go pick that book up, everybody. Scott, thank you so much, sir, for being here. This has been a privilege. It's been an honor. I'm grateful for you, everything that you've done and everything that you continue to do. For those listeners out there, subscribe to the podcast and just hear more awesome conversations like the one we just had, because they matter and they are going to help you get through some of the storms that you were going through in your life. I can guarantee you it. Just like Scott said, that like we go through story here. We talk about our stories. And the stories have an impact on so many more people than you believe. So thank you for tuning in, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.